Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is your guide Elena from Ukraine. Today my country celebrates the holiday, the day of the Ukrainian statehood. This holiday is super important for my country and let me explain you why. I'm sorry that I don't look very well, this is because I had a very sleepless night. Russia congratulated us on the occasion of this holiday with many missiles. Only from the territory of Belarus towards Ukraine there were 25 missiles launched, many of them towards Kiev. Luckily the air defense hit them and no missiles fell on the city, but some of them fell next to Kiev and there were some destructions. So we were not sleeping tonight. The air raid siren was on from 4 a.m. till almost 8. I took my children to the corridor. Luckily, they were not panicking because they didn't hear explosions. They were sleeping. My cat is saying, I'm scared, but I'm not afraid of Putin. Basically, the holiday is very new and we are celebrating it for the first time in our history. It was introduced recently by our president Volodymyr Zelensky. Before the main holiday of our state, it was 24th of August, the day when Ukraine declared its independence. Ukraine became independent from Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed, and this happened 30 years ago. Ukraine became independent, internationally recognized state. By the way, it also became the country number 3 in the world with the huge nuclear arsenal. But Ukraine decided to give it up, to give it away, and Russia was one of the countries that guaranteed Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty. And guess what? They violated the agreement. Very funny, isn't it? But the holiday that we celebrate today emphasizes that the story of our statehood is much longer than these 30 years. It is more than 1,000 years old. And we decided to celebrate it today because today Saint Volodymyr the Great baptized Kievan Rus more than 1,000 years ago. And this happened in Kiev. Back then Kiev was the capital of one of the biggest countries in modern Europe. Prince Volodymyr brought Christianity from Byzantium, started building cathedrals and stone churches. He started building St. Sophia Cathedral. His son Yaroslav the Wise finished it, and St. Sophia was one of the greatest shrines back then. It's still standing here in the city center of Kiev, and you can come and see these old beautiful mosaics. Where was Moscow and Russia back then? It didn't exist. There were just swamps instead of Moscow and St. Petersburg. Basically, Russia called itself Russia after Kievan Rus only in 1721. It was Moscow Kingdom before, it started to call itself Russian Empire after. This is probably the official date when Russia started stealing our culture, our history, and used it as a pretext to steal our land and our territory. One thing, I don't mind if Russia looks at Kievan Rus as its heritage and will be looking for its roots in Kievan Rus. But the thing is that Russia is using this to conquer Ukraine, eliminate Ukrainians, and settled here Russians. They are saying that Russians were always here and Ukrainians are here just by mistake. So we have kind of a problem here because Ukrainians were always living here. The guy who called Moscow Kingdom Russian Empire, his name was Peter I. And recently Putin the Last, he compared himself with Peter I. He just said, you can call me Peter I, I'm like him.
Он когда заложил новую столицу, ни одна из стран Европы не признавала эту территорию за Россией.
But there is one problem for them. The times of predatory wars are over. The times of lowliness and darkness are over. Without Ukraine, Russia doesn't feel itself, great enough. This is why they want to steal our territory and our history. Yes, they are stealing not only toilets and washing machines, solar panels and lots of grain from Ukraine, they are stealing our history. This is why when they manage to capture some of our cities, what do? They burn our Ukrainian books, especially the books on history of Ukraine. They call it extremist books, simply because in these history books it's written that Ukraine is a separate state from Russia and Ukraine exists. They don't want Ukrainian history to exist at all and Ukrainian nation to exist at all. This is why they ruin our museums, set them on fire or destroy it with missiles. This is why they steal collections of our cultural heritage from the museums to Russia. And oh my God, they were doing it for so many times before. Without Ukraine, Russia just doesn't feel itself great enough. But in fact, they are just showing that they are barbaric and miserable and ugly. There is no place for such a political system in the 21st century in Europe. Because Russians, they say they are Europeans, but without Ukraine, they are kind of less Europeans, right? And this makes me feel that to become true Europeans, they need to go deeper into Europe. But you see how they do it? They do not cooperate, communicate, they just come and take by force and say, okay, so this is our land, so now it belongs to us, now this is a part of our history. You know, when they took the south of Ukraine, there were the towns that used to be Greek colonies, like many centuries ago. And you know what their kind of cultural experts say? They say, now we are more of Europeans than, for example, Dutch people. Funny. Simply because this land where Greek colonies were formed now belong to them. What they think belong, but we will take it back for sure. Putin said that Russian borders stop nowhere.
Где заканчивается граница России?
Граница России заканчивается через Берингов пролив с США.
Граница России нигде не заканчивается. Нигде не заканчивается. Нигде не заканчивается.
The time has come to teach him where the borders of Russia stop. And this time Ukraine is not alone. This time freedom is the value that will be protected. This time the world is united and Ukraine will win. So there is a big problem because for a very long time the Ukrainian voice was not heard. You know, unfortunately, till now, a lot of narratives about Ukrainian history was given by Russia, by Russian Empire, by the Soviet Union, but not by Ukraine itself. So there is a lot, you know, to tell and to discover about the true history of Ukraine. Why this day was chosen for the holiday of Ukrainian statehood is because today Saint Volodymyr baptized Kievan Rus. This was a very important step towards formation of the real state, rather than, you know, just union of the local tribes. We can really discuss when the Kievan Rus state was formed, but this day is for sure very important. Now, the figure of Saint Volodymyr the Great is so important for Ukraine that Russians want to steal it. You see, when Russia occupied, annexed Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine 8 years ago, Putin said, well, we took Crimea because this is our land, because our Prince Volodymyr the Great was baptized himself in Crimea. Back then, part of its territory belonged to Byzantium, from which Volodymyr brought Christianity. But you see, this was, you know, this historical fact for him was, you know, good enough to use it to occupy Crimea, just because Volodymyr baptized himself over there, even though this state was not Russia, was not even Kievan Rus. Later he came back home to Kievan Rus and he baptized Kievan's local people in the river of Dnipro in Kiev. You know what I mean? So Putin thinks that Kiev is their territory too, because basically Volodymyr ruled here. And this was used not only by Putin. In 19th century, when Kiev was part of the Russian Empire put, you know, a monument of Saint Volodymyr the Great in the city center of Kiev above Dnipro to emphasize that the story of Russian Empire started here in Kiev. Later, Putin will put the monument of Volodymyr the Great in Moscow. Even though when Volodymyr the Great ruled here, Moscow even didn't exist yet, but because Putin wants to say that the roots of Moscow and Russia are coming from Kiev. This is why Kiev needs to be captured and needs to become Russian. And Ukrainians just don't deserve it because they even do not exist. Which is absolutely wrong, because you see, I'm Ukrainian, guys, and I exist. And the other 44 million Ukrainians too, at least in Ukraine, and many others abroad. Later in the Soviet Union, they created a myth about 3 brotherhood nations: Ukrainians, Belarusians and Russians. But of course, all of them should speak Russian, and of course Russians Russians should be big brother. The other are small and they should behave. All three brothers are coming from one cradle, which is Kiev. And guess what? This cradle should belong to Russia. But guys, we are different. We are very different. We are different nations. We speak different languages. We have different culture. We look different. We have different mentality, characters, identities. We are different. Ukrainians and Russians are not one people. Russians just want Ukrainians to be assimilated with Russians. This is why they create the myth of one people. And Ukraine will win. A little bit of backstage. Well guys, you know, these Russian missiles, they give me more energy to create. I even found how to put up this background Ukrainian flag. For those of you who really love me and watched this video till the end, yesterday Darina said "Mama" for the first time. Каже "Mama". Mama. Mama. Thank you guys for watching this. Don't forget to hit the like button. It really matters. And thank you so much for your support. Goodbye.